It's a lovely picture gallery just up at the end of the screen. Opened to the public in 1817, Dulwich Picture Gallery. Designed by a Regency architect named John Soane, who also designed the Bank of England, the Royal Hospital in Chelsea, Freemasons Hall in the West End. A lot of the paintings at the gallery were from the collection of one actor. And he was called William Cartwright, and he lived in the area. And he gave 293 portraits and pictures to Dulwich College. And Dulwich College donated about 80 of them to the picture gallery. And a few of them were Edward Alleyn's, the actor, as well. He made a fortune from acting. Also happened to be that he married a very rich woman, the stepdaughter of a theatre impresario, Philip Henslowe, Joan. So he inherited portraits and paintings and landscapes, and he donated many of them to people who then donated them to the picture gallery. So people like Canaletto, Van Dyck, Gainsborough, Rembrandt. Picture gallery has a great history, but 1817, so we're talking 200 years now. Edward Alleyn was an English actor, famously played by Ben Affleck in Shakespeare in Love. And the film is to do with William Shakespeare's early career. Alleyn did not have too much to do with Shakespeare. He may have performed in Shakespeare's early plays, but he was working under the rule, I suppose, of the impresario Philip Henslowe. So his life reached much further than the film allows. And a lot of his life is connected with this area. He founded the College of the God's Gift, which is now known as Dulwich College. It seems that parts were written specifically for him, especially in the late 1580s, early 1590s, when Shakespeare was just getting going. Christopher Marlowe was the big deal. He was the famous writer. Rupert Everett plays him in Shakespeare in Love. But Marlowe wrote Dr. Faustus, Tamburlaine the Great, and The Jew of Malta, and Alleyn played the leads in all of those. And he was fond of having, first of all, the lead role, and secondly, he wanted a noble death. The longer the death, the better. And he retired at 32. He actually returned to the stage a few years later because he was requested to by the Queen. So he married Joan, Henslowe's stepdaughter. He amassed, well, quite a large fortune from acting and from business exploits. Lived in Sussex for a while, but in 1605 he bought land in this area. Most of the writers in Henslowe, Shakespeare and Alleyn's time were never printed. You simply wrote a play, it was performed, and then you moved on to the next. The same local people were going to theatres every single day, so they demanded new entertainment. The idea of a famous writer, well, that only came from copyright laws, really. This is Alleyn himself. So Edward and Joan had no children. They amassed a fortune. He knew that when he was an actor, a young lad like this, an apprentice, if he could read and write, would have been playing the female roles. Girls in this country couldn't read or write back then. They weren't allowed to go to school. This is a local sculptor, Louis Simpson, created this lovely sculpture. He gave his money to poor children. And now We have a girls' school, a boys' school, and an older boys' school, Dulwich College. He bought so much land in this area and then started a school. He and Joan had no children. So his children became anyone that he felt should have been educated and maybe didn't, as he didn't when he was young, have the financial means. So Dulwich College originally started as a school for people who couldn't afford it, couldn't afford to send their children to school. 90% of the country couldn't read or write. They hadn't been to school. And yet a lot of these people would spend their last pennies coming to theatres just to be taken away from their day-to-day problems. When Joan passed away, she passed away in 1623, and she's buried in the chapel there, as is Edward, died in 1626. And what he was the first acting superstar. All that money, they created schools. He wanted a legacy. But both Philip Henslowe, who ran the Rose and other buildings in Southwark, and Edward Alleyn kept copious diaries. And what it gave us was the sense of the kind of props that we used, the kind of clothing, how much they charged, if the buildings actually made money or not. And it seems that theatres in the late 1500s and early 1600s at a place like the Globe, that's after Alleyn's time really, he had retired at that point, that held 3,000 people. And considering William Shakespeare lived in a town called Stratford-upon-Avon, which held about 1,000, that's a lot of money. I suppose if you don't have descendants, if you don't have children, the idea is, well, what do we do with that money? He also built almshouses, ALMS houses, charitable houses for the poor, the sick, the needy, all in this area. Some of the most famous residents in this area: Enid Blyton, John Logie Baird, who demonstrated television for the first time. Philip Henslowe had land in this area. Philip Henslowe is played by Geoffrey Rush in Shakespeare in Love. And he owned most of the land. If you've ever been on one of my Shakespeare walks, most of the land from the Golden Hind to the Globe Theatre. He owned about 5 or 6 pubs, theatres and brothels. John Lawson Johnston lived in this area. He was the inventor of Bovril. Phyllis Pearsall, the inventor of the London A to Z. If any of you have been to London over the years and bought or borrowed that book, Phyllis Pearsall lived around here. A rock hero, Bon Scott, passed away not too far from here. Songwriter and singer of AC/DC. And William Henry Pratt, about 10 minutes walk from here, lived, born, went to America, became one of the biggest stars in the world. We now know him as Boris Karloff. Other places in the area, you've got a Frank Dixon Way, which is named after the Dulwich College governor in the 1930s. There's a house just up here called Rokeby, which was another pub called the French Horn Inn, and it changed its name to the Bricklayers Arms. There's a Turney Road just up to the left, named after George Turney, who was a vicar. A Boxall Road. There's a man called Robert Boxall, and he was the landlord, the lessee of the Greyhound pub. Another man, Mr. Goodman, they both had names. They named roads after them. And these were people that owned pubs in the area. So everything around here, the street names, the buildings, they're not named after people that were never here. They're named after people that lived in this area. And I love that. There's also an Aysgarth Road named after a country estate of Edward Alleyn. He lived in Sussex. Dulwich Village, such a popular place that they even have their village orchard. It's not just the buildings, but the land, the street layouts, a lot of them are protected here. And we have in this area a Tulse Hill, a Sydenham Hill, a Denmark Hill, a Dulwich Hill, a Herne Hill. I'm going to try and approach Dulwich College, just at the top of the road. Dulwich College was built by Charles Barry Jr. and his father, Charles Barry. And it opened in 1870. But originally all the three schools were started by Edward Alleyn. Just further back where we were, the Church of God's Gift. The students are still called Old Alleynians. And it is a fee-paying school. But they do have many scholarships and bursaries. And it has the James Caird, which is a lifeboat, which Ernest Shackleton made his voyage of survival to South Georgia in 1916. And that amazing voyage of survival. And also has a copy of some of the first books that were ever printed in this country in the late 1400s. They have Henslowe's diaries. Henslowe gave us so much information about the theatres of Shakespeare's time. Famous pupils of Dulwich College mentioned Shackleton. He lived not too far away from here in Sydenham. Raymond Chandler, whose family, well, he was brought up in America. He had an Irish-American family. And then the family kind of broke up. The wife, husband, mother, father. And then the mother decided to take them not too far from here to West Norwood. And they spent that money sending Chandler to Dulwich College. He wrote, of course, The Big Sleep, The Long Goodbye, and Farewell, My Lovely. Great British comedian who was notorious for having copious amounts of notebooks of all of his jokes, which were famously stolen in the 1980s. Bob Monkhouse, Michael Ondaatje, who wrote The English Patient, C.S. Forrester, who wrote Horatio Hornblower. A lot of the people that lived in this area a few hundred years back would not travel outside this area. You stayed in your local area, and you may have imagined what it was like to live elsewhere. And we think that's what all the great writers in Shakespeare's time did over the last few months. And we're outside the college now. Founded in 1619, but not here, a bit further down the road, as I mentioned. And it came here in 1870. Charles Barry Jr. and Charles Barry designed a lovely ornate Victorian school rather than the stucco, the very simple Georgian buildings that had gone before. They decided something a bit more Italian in style was required. It is very, very ornate. Obviously, it's a private school, or public school as we call them. Lots of love to you all. I will see you very soon. Thank you for any comments. Take care.